Hello! With the start of June and the start of summer, we thought a video on rosé would be quite suitable. Rosé is often primarily judged on its colour, so ranging from very subtle pale pinks to deeper coloured pinks, right through to a pale red. The vast majority of these pale styles do tend to be dry. However, people sometimes wrongly assume that those that have got a darker colour are going to be sweet. It's not always the case. Appearance does play a huge part in rosé. You only have to look at the bottles on the shelf to see the varying shapes and sizes that the wine comes in, from bell-shaped, even in baskets sometimes. It can make choosing the right wine quite difficult, so hopefully by the end of this video you'll be a little bit more informed when you're making your next decision. Strangely, we do tend to use the French word for rosé, rather than, as we do with other wines, use the English word red and white. We don't tend to use the term pink that often, although we do often call it blush, especially when we're referring to those quite delicate Pinot Grigio styles of rosé. There are three main ways of making rosé, and it's important to understand them so you can appreciate why there's such a vast array of styles out there. It's all about the amount of time that the juice spends in contact with the grape skins where the colour comes from. To give you an idea, for red wine, mostly the contact with the skin will be about 2 to 4 weeks, whereas for rosé, this period is shortened to roughly about 12 to 36 hours. Pressing is the first method we're going to look at, and this creates the lightest, most delicately coloured wines. So you can imagine with our current trend for those super pale styles, this is a popular method at the moment. The process can be greatly controlled with a degree of pressure exerted on the juice, determining the level of colour that is extracted from those grape skins. So quite a delicate process, but they ensure once everything is pressed, the juice is immediately removed to prevent any further coloration. It's also kept well away from oxygen to ensure that that pale pink doesn't start to brown at all. You may see wines made in this method also labelled as vin gris. Maceration is the preferred technique by most people. As soon as the grapes are crushed, the juice is left in contact with those dark grape skins for a short amount of time, often at a cool temperature to slow the extraction process down. It can be very delicate, and it is vital to keep the oxygen away once again. Blending sounds quite self-explanatory, and it is. The process is simply adding in a small amount of red wine to a finished white wine. Therefore, you get that rosé colour, but perhaps not always the same flavour or the same hue to the colour. Rather surprisingly, Champagne is the only controlled appellation within Europe that permits this process. It is banned elsewhere, but it is a popular process in South Africa as well. We also have saignée, which means bleeding. The process creates a red wine and a rosé at the same time. The grapes are crushed and put into a tank, and after a small maceration period, some of the wine is bled off from the top of the tank, which concentrates the remaining red wine and creates a rosé on the side. It's a popular process in areas that are more known for their red wines. There is also another process, if local legislation allows, which allows the co-fermentation of white grapes with red grapes. For example, in the Côte de Provence region, they allow Rhone, also known as Vermentino, to be blended in with red grapes. Let's start by looking at sparkling rosé, in particular the wines of Champagne, where rosé versions do tend to charge a bit of a premium price tag. And as we already know, there's no delicate extraction process, it's simply a matter of blending for most. So you might discount these wines because of their cost, but for example, wines like the Pol Roger Vintage Rosé have got an extraordinary complexity with lots of strawberries and wild red fruits over the top of biscuit, brioche, and those toasty characteristics we expect from a vintage champagne. It's absolutely delicious. In France, we also have plenty of Crémant. As you can see here, this Cabernet Franc rosé from the Loire Valley is quite deep in colour, but it is absolutely bone dry. It's got quite bold fruit flavours which make it a great partner for plenty of different dishes. Now, whilst Prosecco is the most popular white sparkling wine, it's not until extremely recently that a bottle labelled with Prosecco is going to be able to have a rosé version. This is because the Italian government have now passed a law enabling producers to combine about 10 to 15% of Pinot Nero or Pinot Noir into the Claret grape, which is a white grape, and therefore have a rosé Prosecco, benefiting from the popularity of rosé. We also have Cava, so labelled normally as Rosado. These wines can often be quite deeply coloured, and we do get non-vintage and vintage styles as well, offering fantastic amount of complexity. Made in the same way as Champagne, Cremants and Cavas don't tend to have different prices for their rosé and standard brut versions. So if you're into your rosé fizz, those are two really good places to start. We do also have some sparkling wine from other premium producing regions in the world, for example, Australia and Argentina, to name but a few. With still wines, we start off with the pale, dry styles, which are easily the most popular at the moment. Provence has really led the way with this trend, with the paler the better often being the motto for wine buyers. And it's easy to see why, with their subtle characteristics. The paler style is now being mimicked by producers across other wine regions. Now we have those dry but deeply coloured wine styles, which in Italy and Spain is very desirable. Sometimes they even go to the lengths of fermenting extra grape skins to improve the intensity of colour for these wines. And it's probably because they tend to drink rosé with food quite a lot, with those extra flavours adding to the complexity of the wine and therefore making it more food friendly. Our final category is the medium to sweet wines that are often very fruity, often hailing from California, where a sweet tooth has created demand for wines made from white Zinfandel with some very commercially successful brands. You know which ones they are. In the 1980s in California, there was a certain trend of labelling pale versions of the deeply coloured red wines made from red grapes as white. Hence we have white Zinfandel, even though it's a rosé. These wines do contain usually quite a hidden amount of sugar, so do beware that they can contribute to the hangover. However, they are a fantastic entry point into the wine scene for those just beginning their wine journey, so they shouldn't be discounted, and they're a great partner for spicier foods as well. Grenache is a thin-skinned grape variety, which makes it suitable for the production of rosé, as it has a low amount of anthocyanins which create the pigment or colour in the grape's skin. In the regions where Grenache is popular, such as the Rhone and Spain, they do prefer those slightly darker coloured rosés, therefore a longer maceration period is required. Pinot Noir makes rosé wines with plenty of elegance and finesse, with fresh red fruits. Again, it is a very thin-skinned grape variety, removing the risk of extracting unwanted colours and tannins from those grape skins. Pinot Grigio often makes white wines, but the grape itself actually has a slightly pinkish tinge in the skin, which is why it's very suitable for making those blush rosé wines popular from Italy. Malbec is a grape variety more commonly associated with making quite fruit-driven red wines with soft tannins. It is perfect for making rosé with plenty of bold red fruit flavours, however, and is a real good food-friendly wine. There are plenty of other local native grape varieties that are made in regions across the world. There's almost too many to mention. Where it's possible to make red wine, often you'll find rosé wine, from grapes such as Mourvèdre to Montepulciano and beyond. France produces about 30% of the world's rosé, with a focus on the warmer areas in the south around the Mediterranean. such as Provence. The wines from this region are often made using Grenache and Cinsault, grapes which typically make quite robust red wines from regions such as Châteauneuf-du-Pape. While the winemaking techniques ensure that Provence is very pale and dry in colour, the grape varieties are still contributing plenty of flavour and complexity to the wine, so these wines sometimes can be quite deceptive in their flavours. In the rest of France, in areas like the Rhone, the Languedoc and the Roussillon, rosés are as prevalent as reds. But don't forget that these are red-dominated winemaking regions, except for a small appellation in the southern Rhone called Tavel. This is entirely committed to producing rosé wines, and they're some of the most full-bodied that you can find in the world. When we're heading to the Loire, there are varying degrees of sweetness and quality that can be found there. If you prefer wines with a slight sweet touch, look for wines from Anjou, where Cabernet Franc is the dominant grape variety. If you prefer things slightly drier, then why not try a Pinot Noir from one of your favourite white wine producing regions, such as Sancerre. Heading to Spain, we can see that the Spanish do take their rosé quite seriously, having two names for pink wine, Rosado referring to the lighter pink styles, and Claret sometimes for those more deeply coloured wines. In Spain, as elsewhere around the world, producers are reflecting that Provence trend for pale styles. Just look to Rioja for some examples of this. Traditionally, however, Spain has made deeply coloured wines, and it can put some people off trying them. It is worth doing a little bit of research on a producer before you go shopping. However, if you do end up with a wine that's slightly sweeter than your tastes, try it with some spicy food and it will soften that sweetness. We can't talk about rosé without mentioning Portugal, home of the Mateus rosé that had such a popular following in the 80s. When we look at Italy, we can see that they aren't huge domestic drinkers of rosé. They do produce quite large volumes of Pinot Grigio blush for the export market, but you can find here and there in plenty of regions wines made from unusual local grape varieties, such as this Bardolino. Around the rest of the world, we have plenty of producers that create rosés to suit their local tastes for their markets or local cuisines. Normally, where red and white wine are made, rosé will also be produced. If you're thinking about pairing wine with a food and you're unsure whether to go for a red or a white, why not join that middle ground with the rosé, often keeping it fresh but adding extra complexity and a fuller body. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and as always, if you have any questions, do email events@averys.com.